The Kudlow Report, we're coming to you live from CNBC headquarters. Now, here's the fact. We are watching the failure of the liberal entitlement state right before our very eyes. Obamacare is crumbling. The law hinged on the young and uninsured to sign up. And guess what? They are not. It's proof positive. Central planning doesn't work. I believe we need a 3-year moratorium on the entire program. Just stop and take a time out, including the mandates and the tax penalties, and let the country start all over again and get something with more freedom that will really make America healthy. Just a time out. Anyway, we've got Keith Boykin, CNBC contributor. He's former White House aide for Bill Clinton. And we welcome back Avik Roy, senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. I want to start with my friend Keith Boykin. I know we're going to disagree, Keith, but a bunch of numbers coming out. We've got this McKinsey survey. I want to start there. Just 1 in 10 uninsured who would qualify have signed up for one of the Obamacare plans. Just 1 in 10. Now, that by itself is a crushing defeat.
I don't think so, Larry. You can't judge the success of a program by the first few months, especially a major national initiative like this. I mean, if Obamacare was such a failure, why have 4 million people signed up for the health care exchanges? Why have 3.6 million people been added to the rolls for health care coverage through the Medicare expansion plan? Why did the state of New Hampshire, just yesterday, the state Senate, Republican-controlled state Senate, vote to expand the Medicaid coverage in that state? There clearly is there are some problems with people who aren't fully satisfied with Obamacare, but the newest polls that come out show only 28% of Americans want to repeal it. So if Republicans want to go down that line, which it seems that they do, they're going to box themselves in.
By the way, that's why I use the term moratorium, because I think there are elements of Obamacare that would be in a Republican plan. All right? I'll grant you that. Not many, but a few. A moratorium is just a hold. Stop all this stuff. I think that's what really people want because they see they're getting in deeper and deeper. Now, Avik, let me give you a shot at some of these numbers. First of all, back to the McKinsey survey, only 27% who actually bought coverage were previously uninsured. So just a little more than a quarter actually were previously uninsured. Again, this runs completely counter to Obamacare and what they're hoping to get.
Yeah, so Keith threw out the number of the 4 million who've signed up on the exchanges. Only about 475,000 uninsured people have actually enrolled for coverage on the exchanges. And there were 4.7 million people, according to the Associated Press, which has been compiling this data, that have had their plans canceled under Obamacare who shop for coverage on their own. So that's 4.7 million people whose plans were canceled, only 475,000 who were newly insured, who were previously uninsured. So the vast majority of people who've gotten coverage to the exchanges are people whose old plans were canceled and they have to buy new ones. And you know what's even more telling is that if the McKinsey survey, and this is the really worrisome part, of the people who were uninsured who did not buy coverage but who checked out the website, 50% said that the reason why they haven't bought coverage is because the plans were too expensive.
Right.
And that fundamentally has always been the problem with this law, is that it lards so many regulations on the delivery of the health coverage service that the plans are too expensive even if you qualify for a subsidy.
You know, Keith, I just got to go. The most general thing here, I mean, I think the statistics are important, and I think the argument about them is very important. I think the website is important. But I think at the end of the day, the premiums are too high and the deductibles are too high. So you pay too much every month and there's too much out-of-pocket cost. And as Robert Leshevsky wrote in a very great blog, he was talking about the failure of geniuses to produce new dog food. They never spoke to the dogs. They just spoke to the egghead professors. The problem with this is that the egghead professors at Penn and Harvard and MIT, and you know who I'm talking about, they never spoke to the consumers. So if they had, they would have known the premiums are too high, the deductibles are too high, and that's killing this thing.
Well, maybe one of those egghead Harvard people was Mitt Romney, because he was the grandfather or the godfather of this whole plan in the first place. But look, the reality is, the Republicans are going to spend all this time. They voted yesterday for the 50th time to repeal Obamacare. The American people don't want that. But the truth is that there's been a widespread, well-funded misinformation campaign on the part of the conservatives and the right to try to distort the reality. Perry Bacon did a great story on thegrio.com just last month that showed this Kentucky woman, a Republican woman in Kentucky, who's opposed to President Obama, opposed to Obamacare, but she just signed up for Obamacare. She's visited a doctor 3 times. She never had access to a doctor before except for free health care clinics, and she's actually enjoying the benefits that she's getting from it. If you ask people on the polls, if you ask people, do they support the idea of children being able to stay on their parents' plans until they're 26? Yes, they support
that. But that's the easiest one.
Do they support pre-existing conditions coverage? Yes, they do.
Those
do they support ending the ban on lifetime limits? Yes, they support those things.
The pre-existing coverage and the 26-year-olds, that's why I'm for a moratorium, right? Because those can be included. But this other stuff,
no, they can't. You can't finance this, Larry. It's not. You can't make the insurance companies pay for expanding the coverage for all these people who are sick without creating a system. Without creating a system to subsidize.
We're going to learn this. Ovik, this is another point I want to make before we get out. This whole business about extending the canceled plans for 2 more years, that you can renew the canceled plans. Now, again, people are saying that this is going to cost insurance companies a whole lot more. A, they were counting on higher premiums because they had to meet the mandates, or B, the paperwork of renewal is very difficult, and that C, unfortunately, the bailout of insurance companies may be right smack in front of us. And I don't want that. And that's why I want a moratorium on this whole story.
Well, the insurance companies have already, the for-profit insurers have already reported in their most recent quarterly earnings calls that they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars on the exchange this year because these rules have been changed on the fly. And I got to correct 2 things that my buddy Keith said over there. The first is that there wasn't a 50th vote to repeal Obamacare. The House voted to delay the individual mandate by 1 year, which is something that the Obama administration has already done by executive fiat. So by that standard, the Obama administration has repealed Obamacare probably a dozen times this year.
They haven't. They haven't delayed the individual mandate.
For people whose plans were canceled, they've delayed the individual mandate by a year. And the other point to make about Mitt Romney, the plan that Mitt Romney actually advocated, if you go back to what he proposed in 2006, was he wanted everyone to have catastrophic coverage. He didn't support all these insurance mandates. That was the 80% Democratic legislature which threw those on there, and he basically taking half a loaf versus a full loaf.
I don't want to argue about Mitt Romney. I just want to say, I would say, Keith, my buddy, look, I'm just going to say, the president is in effect doing the moratorium that I'm calling for, especially with regard to renewing these canceled policies. He is now in a 3-year moratorium. He just had 2 more years. And with respect to employer-based policies, he's at 2 years, and I'll bet you he goes to 3 years. And Keith, you know, March 31st, they are going to extend that deadline. There aren't going to be any tax penalties. This whole thing is going to be extended.
I don't know what's going to happen with the deadline. I don't know if they can extend it, to be honest. But, there is a history here, Larry. Look, for example, at Social Security and Medicare. In 1935, when they created the Social Security system, there were widespread problems and concerns about whether it could work. They had to create and invent Social Security numbers because they realized they didn't have computers in, they had duplicate names, they didn't know how they were going to process it. And people like Alf Landon, the Republican presidential candidate, denounced it and said it would never work. Now it's one of the most popular government programs out there.
I told Keith, I was there. I told Alf Landon.
I bet you were. You could probably tell me from direct experience.
To do that. It was a huge mistake. He didn't listen to me, and he got his keister whooped. I got to get out of here. You guys are both great. Keith Boykin and Avik Roy. This discussion to be continued.